We'll go on to our next session. So we have with us Mr. Michael Mbuthia from AfricaNenda. He'll introduce himself. And he's got an interesting presentation comparing the interoperability case studies between Rwanda and Kenya. Michael? All right, just getting his presentation loaded. After Michael, PA is going to join us, and then we'll have a break before Ed Cable takes us on the final session. A couple of housekeeping items. Again, we have this evening from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. A cocktail party. So at 6 p.m., make your way to the reception on ground level. So if you're looking at the sliding doors leading out, turn to your right, walk all the way to the end, there's a bar. Once you get to the bar, turn to your right again, there's a beautiful terrace there, laid out with a lot of cocktails and stuff. Now, in order for you to get in, you will need your badge, because the bar is closed tonight for our event. So please remember to carry your badge. Join us there from 6 p.m. We'd love to have you there. Michael?
Good afternoon, everyone. I've actually come with my phone because Simeon has told me I have exactly 30 minutes, and then he calls me off from the stage. My name is Michael Mbuthia from AfricaNenda. We're doing a case study of 2 countries, interoperability, just to see how they went through their journey, you know, what they uncovered and the learnings from there. So it's a very small agenda. Hopefully I'll cover it in 30 minutes. I have 70 slides, so I'll just be skipping some of them. Okay. So just to go through an overview of our ethos as AfricaNenda, and I'll say who AfricaNenda is at the very end. We advocate for open loop systems, which are available and licensed to any DFSPs. We also recommend real-time payment systems, which are push enabled and are final and irrevocable. We also support same-day type of settlements to make sure that value is moved as fast as possible, and we advocate for cost recovery models. We are not advocating for for-profit models because they come with their own challenges, and we also advocate for a shared fraud detection solution, and I'm sure Greg, who's in the room, will really appreciate that comment. So I'll start with the Kenyan interoperability journey. And I'll make a statement which has been replayed very often, that 90% of payments are made in cash, and only 10% of payments are made through cashless technology. And you know, for a long time, I've often questioned this narrative up until when I got into a project and we actually saw it real live. So this is Kenya. This is a market called Gikomba market. It's one of the biggest markets in Kenya. It's extremely informal. And all these people that you're seeing here trade in cash. So if you remember the first point I mentioned about 90% of payments being in cash, when we set up a national payment system in Kenya, and we went down to some of these markets to understand the drivers and motivations, we actually understood why they prefer cash. And it's because cash is readily available, you can transact with it immediately, and in some cases when you told them you're building this national payment system, they said, will I have value immediately? Will there be any delay? So they want to have a payment system that is equal or superior than cash. And that's the benchmark that we have. So what are our challenges in Kenya? We faced a couple of challenges because we wanted to understand, even before building a national payment infrastructure, what is the challenge in the market? And we started looking at various buckets. We looked at one challenge that we had is that during that time, we didn't have any platform to be able to send money across banks. Yes, we had RTGSs, but it was a very clunky system, and it still is in terms of the way RTGSs are designed. And there was no real-time account-to-account infrastructure to enable payments. And then the other point that we saw when we went down to the markets is that consumers largely wanted cash. And in those solutions that are there, they actually demanded for commissions for payment. So if you use a card device, they would take a certain % of commission. And if you look at the traders in the earlier picture, they want to make payment for 1,000 shillings and they get 1,000 shillings, right? They don't want 1,000 minus commission because they're already used to cash. And then for merchants as well, we understood that card payments carry a higher risk because higher commission, and in some cases 2.5. And then the cost of acquiring the devices to power those payments also carries a cost, which is often passed on to the consumers. And we also looked at SMEs, and we saw that they also largely traded in cash. And they wanted an environment which is 24/7. And all these are market insights that we gathered when we went down to the market. And then for mobile network operators, we also tried to interrogate them and find out what would be the value proposition to them. And largely they're closed loop. If you look at Kenya, previously when you're deploying this payment value proposition, they were closed loop, and there was no interoperability between the service providers. So we came up with five key value propositions. And the first value proposition is innovation. As we saw, one of the gaps that we picked out in the market was there was no 24/7 payment infrastructure. Yes, there was mobile infrastructure for retail payments, but there was no 24/7 bank transaction payment system. So number one value proposition that we designed was innovation. And then the second value proposition that we designed is we put a point across that at some point banks need to share. Banks ordinarily don't like to share. And we said maybe we need to create an environment that banks can share by offering a shared infrastructure system that would enable them push value across to each other. So again, value proposition number two. Now, the first two buckets were mostly on the bank side, but you also needed to look at the customer value, because when you're building these payment systems, you're not building them for banks, you're building them for the consumer. So when we interrogated the consumer, they said three things. Number one, they wanted a 24-hour economy, where if they're trading at any point in time, they could actually move value. And then they wanted real-time settlement. If I send you value now, you get it immediately, similar to cash. And then they wanted higher transaction volumes, limits. So if you look at markets, they categorize their payment systems into high value, low value. So for Kenya, you could only transact up until 150,000 Kenya shillings every day on the mobile network services. If you wanted to transact higher values above 300,000, we'd have to go over the counter, queue on the line, and do the withdrawal or do the transaction. So they said they wanted to have more flexibility moving higher limits digitally. And then they also wanted a way to make sure that the risk involved around digital payments was addressed. And then transaction visibility. If I send you money, I need to be sure it's you I'm sending money to, and I can confirm through some audit trail. And then financial inclusion, because a lot of the customers, when they receive payment, they also want to make additional further payments, and they also want to make sure that the payments that they're making, that they at least are affordable as possible, and I'll say how we address that. So you remember we started with the gap? So we wanted to answer the why. Why would we do this? So after launching the product, we sort of picked out a couple of sound bites, and just to read some of them. Then the product was launched way back in 2017. Herrera says PesaLink is the most underrated invention of 2017. Just transacted 300,000 on a Sunday morning in a matter of seconds. You remember we started with the why. Do you want to do this payment system? And we answered it. This is a customer saying on a Sunday, sitting in his house, he transacted 300,000. Another one says, PesaLink is awesome, my friend. No more RTGSs or M-Pesa. I'll not say what he said on the last part. BS. Another person says, very convenient, very easy. Another one says, really enjoying free transfers apart from the 24. So what they're saying is that they have seen another world beyond banking services where they can actually move value beyond banking hours, because banks ordinarily close at a certain time, and this solution managed to do this for them. And then one threw a note saying it would make sense if PesaLink would do B2B, and that's a very good point. But even after doing all that, there's one person that I've highlighted, said, okay, so what is PesaLink? You know, what is this? People are talking about it. And we might have answered the why for some people, but not for others, and he's still asking that. So we started the build, and you know, this is a technical design of how we built it. We built like 3 data centers, interconnected it with MPLS, dark fiber all across, high redundancy, high availability, and this is the tech stuff. But you've not rolled out the product as yet. So I want to talk briefly about the journey. So we started in 2015, and we started asking the why through a pre-study workshop, market research, and trying to understand what is the gap in the market so that we can go and innovate around it. And then we set up teams to run the operations. From 2015, went to December, set up the data center, set up the testing sandbox, started building the channels, and started the user acceptance tests. And we did them in 4 waves. So between January 2016 and December 2016, we did 4 waves of UATs, and I'll say why. When you do your user acceptance testing, you sort of pick out the bugs that are currently there, you know, in the build, and you maybe have heard it mentioned that even during the POC, we picked up some of the gaps in the Rwanda ecosystem, and this helps us to understand what to fix, how to fix it, and how to iterate better. And then eventually, at some point in 2017, we went live on the product. All right, so after building it, we had to pitch, right? Because you understand that you built this ecosystem, it's sitting somewhere in the cloud or an infrastructure somewhere, but you still have to sell it to customers. The customers who are saying that they can transact a certain limit on a Sunday. So the banks did the marketing collateral, and every bank still has a value proposition individual for their customers. So all the banks did the marketing pitch, but we also had to go pitch to the regulator. Now, the pitch to the customers was easier than the regulator. So I'll ask the team at the back to play the video. As they're playing the video, I'll talk through it. And you remember that we had various sprints of pitching. So at some point, we'd go to the central bank and pitch to them and say, we have this innovation, please give us a product approval. And they would say, it's a fantastic product, but what gap are you solving for? And we said, we are solving for this gap, financial inclusion, higher limits. Said, all right, let's do a test. And the honorable governor invited us to do a demo. And one person on one end was from one bank, and another person from the other end was from another bank. And he said, please send value from your bank to the other bank, and let's see if it goes. That was a true test of whether the innovation was working. So maybe cue up the video, and then we see what the governor says.
I remember a conversation once with regard to somebody who brought, or a set of innovators that brought a product, and our question was, how long does it take for the transaction to get completed? And at that point they said, actually 45 seconds. And our view is absolutely not. So they came back, I guess, a few months later, and they brought it down to 23 seconds. I said, no, absolutely not. So by the time they launched it, when we approved it, they had brought it down to 10 seconds. Now, from our perspective, from our perspective in the central bank, this was important to have it as short as possible, because even...
Sorry, it's a long video. So essentially what happened is that we were very excited that we had built this product, and we went to the governor and said, Honorable Governor, we want to get a product approval. And he said, all right, fantastic. Send value from one bank to the next. And one individual on one side actually originated the transaction from their bank to the next, and the governor had a clock and said, let's count. So the first demo we did, it took almost close to 40 seconds for the transaction to reflect on the other side. And the governor was just sitting there and said, it's a good innovation, but it's totally unacceptable. If you're talking about real-time payments, it has to be less than 40 seconds. So we went back, configured our systems, put them on high availability, all flash. So did a couple of tweaks, went back 2 months later, it was 20 seconds. It could not approve the product. So the third time around, we had managed to bring it down to 10 seconds, and finally we got a product approval. Now, this was one of the preconditions, because the governor was saying that if RTGS takes 1 day, and you're talking about real-time payments, then real-time should essentially be real-time. And in fact, when you're getting a product approval for 10 seconds, you're saying, by the way, you need to bring it down further to microseconds. And I believe products like Mojo Loop now are highly advanced to the point that they can do some of these transactions in a faster way. Okay. All right, so let's look at the numbers. It will not do any justice for us to talk about the innovation without talking about the numbers, because essentially we said we're on a cost recovery model, and that model should maybe have a shorter curve. And just to give you some numbers immediately after launch, and you can see that we launched on around early October. So you can see we started tracking the transactions during that particular month, and you can see that on a daily basis, the innovation does almost close to 80 million Kenya shillings. On a month-by-month basis, 2 months combined, it's around 8 billion Kenya shillings. So that's the quantum of transactions flowing through the system. And if you remember, we had one of the value propositions was higher transaction limits, right? Because banks were only allowing a cap of 0 to 300 officially. Mobile network operators were allowing 0 to 150,000 Kenya shillings. So this allowed innovators, banks, and everyone to send large cap value transactions in a short period of time. And you can see the quantum of value that is being sent in such a short time. But let's interpret the numbers a bit, because when we launched the product, we thought that we were solving the gap for the traders, remember? But eventually, when we looked at the numbers, they told us something different, that the numbers at the bottom, which is the transactions below 500, were low. But the higher value numbers were high. And we thought maybe we had interpreted the numbers wrongly, but it looks like we had solved a problem for a different market. That we had traders who were transacting in high volumes, but they were lacking a tool to do that. And that's why you see the numbers going. Now, this curve for low values actually went up at some point, because immediately the traders realized that they could actually trade 0 to 500 shillings instantaneously. Then the curve started taking a hockey stick approach. But you also got some interesting feedback, because if someone was transferring 1,000 shillings, they would do split transactions, right? So we would see them as 2 bullet 500 transactions instantly, but the person has split the value. Why? Because the product, because of the financial inclusion aspect of it, had zero-rated any charge between 0 to 500, no charge at the switch, no charge at the bank level. So it was 0 at moving value at, so what traders are doing is that, oh, I want to send 1,000 shillings. For 1,000 shillings, I'll be charged 20 shillings. But if I split the transaction, I'll save 20 shillings. Now, the logic about splitting 2 transactions and the time it takes to save just 20 shillings, it's debatable, but they were doing it. And someone would actually spend time splitting transactions. So when we innovate products, sometimes we innovate products for the market, and then the market shows you the reality. And that's why you need to read the market properly. So the product, eventually this is what it morphed into. Just plethora of solutions, both for banks, non-banks, fintech solutions, and over-the-top services. So that's Kenya. And happy to say that I was part of that whole journey. And we go to Rwanda, and one of the things that you need to do when you're in Rwanda, you need to see the ladies dance. You know, they have a very nice cultural dance in Rwanda, and it's you know, you need to see it to believe it. It's fantastic. So always ask when we're building these payment systems, what is a gap? And Innocent was here in the morning, and he told us that you know, there is a proof of concept policy, but also just to push that narrative a bit, and the gap in Rwanda when it started was the MPs at some point, the members of parliament in Rwanda, summoned the Minister of ICT over interoperability, and just to read the comments from the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Economic and Trade. And to quote him, and it's actually on record, currently if you are an MTN mobile money subscriber, you are unable to pay Airtel Money subscriber. When you have a digital payment channel in a given bank, you can only use that channel in that bank. But, and this is a caveat, and he was proposing that after linking these channels, you can have a product in a bank for use for payment via MTN, Airtel, Equity, Becca, and the rest. And that's the chairman of the Parliamentary Committee of Trade. So this necessitated an idea mooted from the government saying that possibly there's an opportunity to make the payment systems interoperate. So MTN was there, Airtel was there, Becca was there, everyone was there, but they're operating in silos. So that was a gap. And then we started the build. And what happened is at some point after that meeting, and Afas had mentioned that the central bank was tasked to build a blueprint first, understand the rationale why we need to do interoperability, and a blueprint was developed. But happy to say two things, that this blueprint, when it was developed, aligned 100% to L1P principles, because even before we had a look at L1P principles, the blueprint principles for Rwanda were pegged on 3 items: shared payment infrastructure, larger addressable market for digital payments, and increased digital liquidity. Now, if you flip that and layer that on to L1P principles, open loop systems, right? Centralized platform with a single set of rules, instant real-time payments, fair and reasonable pricing for participants, and ultimately, you know, users, and then secure and reliable payment systems. So if you have some time, you can go to the central bank website, National Bank of Rwanda, download the blueprint that was designed, and then go to the module loop page and look at the blueprint, and you will see that there's a certain commonality between them that actually shows that if you build these platforms in a certain way, then you have utility and you have equity as you move along, especially when you're trying to build shared platforms. So we pitched, and we started pitching. So, you know, we pitched to banks, the same approach we used in Kenya. Afasa, let me ask the ASWICH guys to stand up. Let me embarrass them a bit because we built this payment system with them. Alpha said, please stand up. Rachel, Amable, now you're there. Manzi, I can see you there. And anyone else was at ASWICH? Nare is there. Yeah, and also my good brother, Alain. So Alain was also supporting ASWICH. So this is a team that was tasked to build this infrastructure. So if at the very tail end of it, you'll see that we've launched a product called eCash. Please appreciate they've launched it last year, right? So this is a team that built it. So we went and pitched. How many meetings did you have, Afasad? He's laughing. So many. So the thing about it is you can have an idea, but you have to pitch it. You have to pitch it to the regulator. You have to pitch it to banks. You have to pitch it sometimes to yourself, because sometimes you start questioning yourself. is this thing viable, right? Can we really do it? And then we pitched, and with the support of the team. And these are the use cases that we pitched. So the first use case, with the support of RSwitch, and RSwitch is a national payments operator, launched the P2P use case called eCash. And you can send, you remember the member of parliament who was talking about the challenge of sending money from MTN to Airtel? Eventually, the industry and the country managed to do it, and the product is called eCash, run by RSwitch. Now, that went live, and we have started a new use case, and that's the use case that you're doing a proof of concept on. And the proof of concept is to test whether, we actually did a proof of concept and closed it, and we said that it is actually viable for you to send money, value, across mobile network operators or across banks using module loop technology. Done, signed off, dusted, and now we want to build it for merchant payments. So eventually, hopefully, at the next convening, we'll have a much more better update in terms of how far we've gone. But the teams are already set up. We've gotten some very good support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we will be building the merchant payments on the module loop ecosystem. But allow me to speak about the numbers, because sometimes the numbers give us a picture. So 6 months, and I've pinched this slide from RSwitch. 6 months for eCash, 1.3 million users registered, 146% monthly year-on-year growth, 5.1 billion Rwandan francs transacted, 1.1 million transactions transacted in a span of less than 6 months. So I mean, let's congratulate the teams. They've done a good, and that's one product. So imagine now if we layer on merchant use case on module loop, it's going to take a hockey stick curve, right? And that's the future that you want to see. That's a value proposition. So to recap, I think Simeon is moving closer to the podium. For us, what are the key ingredients to deploy a successful IIPS, instant and inclusive payment system? I think number one is to ask yourself the why. If you remember the Kenya situation, we had to go down to a market and figure out what do the traders want, what do the customers want. And the same thing for AfricaNenda. I remember AfricaNenda taking me to the bus station here in Rwanda, all the way, 15, 20 minutes from here, just to size up the market. So always ask, and I know a lot of colleagues here from South Sudan, from Comesa, from Guinea, looking to build a retail payment product. I think the question that you should ask first is why? What is the gap in the market? And use a technical solution, and I propose module loop to address the gap in the market. And then also have a clear governance model which balances cooperation between competitors. And you'll see in any market there are banks, MNOs, and there's always a balance to play. And then there's also an economic model which incentivizes parties. And I'll say that at some point the economic model is driven by how expensive the solution behind a product is. If the solution is expensive, then that cost will either be passed to the switch or the payment service provider that is operating it, or will be passed to the customer. So the more you subsidize or use open source or open systems, the more you reduce your cost of the build of the solution, and as such you can actually roll out faster, scale out faster, and offer better prices to your customers. And then the operational model that is safe. And also I've just boldened the sustainable low-cost model. Low to acquire, meaning that the solution should be low to acquire, should be low to deploy, meaning that it's not difficult to deploy, and low cost to operate, meaning that even for you to operate it, it doesn't take a lot of effort. And if you look at the components around module loop, built on open source architecture, there's a community around it, so if you're stuck somewhere, throw a question on the community and you'll get bombarded by all the answers to the questions. There's nothing as good as a community behind you. And then just a small pitch about AfricaNenda. I think everything we've talked about there, we can help you do. And AfricaNenda is an independent entity that supports building of national payment systems. And we support the incubation, readiness assessment, acceleration, scheme design, and project facilitation. And we are happy to support you in your journey. Our value proposition is twofold. We offer pre-project support, and then we offer capacity building. Pre-project support is all the work that you do before a project. That means readiness assessment, project definition, all the stuff we've talked about in the slides. We can help you do that, but we also help you with the capacity building side. And we help, with technical expertise, knowledge sharing sessions, and anything that you need on training. I'll say thank you very much, and I'll take questions.
One question, if there. All right, excellent. Thank you so much.